Here are the best items that you can buy to counter every hero in Deadlock, sorted by early game, mid game, and late game respectively. Let's dive into it. Let's start off with Abrams. When you're in the laning phase, he's bound to stay alive for quite a bit, even if you end up winning trades. So if you purchase any anti-heal items such as Decay or Heal Bane, this will let you lower his self-heal, which stops him from staying alive for as long for the small price of 1250. Depending on the matchup, you could also consider Reactive Barrier to gain a massive advantage thanks to the shields if he keeps hitting you with either of his stuns. And depending on your abilities, if you're a bullet damage hero or want to build silencer down the road, then it might be worth investing into the slowing bullets around the early game as well, as this slows Abrams down and lets you kite him for longer. In the mid game, if you're playing a hero with a faster fire rate, then you can also benefit from toxic bullets, which gives you even more anti-heal as well as good damage against high health targets. Depending on the rest of the roster, which we will cover in the rest of the video, you might also benefit from Ethereal Shift, which could let you stay alive if Abrams pops the ultimate and you cannot get away in time. As for Bebop, in the laning phase, you can practically shut down his value early by investing into the Reactive Barrier with your spare 1250 souls. This makes any hook or uppercut give you a massive shield that offsets most if not all the damage from his follow-up. As the game progresses, you can buy yourself a debuff remover for 3000 souls if Bebop is getting a lot of hooks in on you, and especially if it goes for a double bomb combo, which means you can just use the debuff remover after the bombs hit. If you want to save any teammates that end up getting hooked, then you can also choose to buy the rescue beam for the same price to yoink them back as soon as the hook hits as well. Another 3000 soul pick can be the Ethereal Shift, as this lets you phase out of existence and stay alive after getting hooked, but unless somebody is there to save you afterwards, you kinda just prolong the inevitable. If you are double bombed and booped back, then it can also be used to clear the bombs from you. After that, let's talk about Dynamo. In the laning phase and the early game, no matter what build Dynamo goes for, you will benefit the most from the Reactive Barrier, since it pops both for his first ability and then his ultimate. As you progress into the early to mid game, it might be worth looking into a knockdown. If you know that Dynamo is going for an ultimate, then you can start the knockdown reactively, and then if he lands it, then it's guaranteed to be cut short thanks to the massive anvil lingering over his head. If you're playing a support hero, you can also consider the rescue beam here, which can let you yoink any teammates that got hit by Dynamo's first ability or ultimate out of harm's way. I've seen some people recommend Ethereal Shift here, but I don't think it's valuable enough to make a noticeable difference. So anyways, moving into the late game, it might be worth considering either Unstoppable, which you can use preemptively or, depending on your reflexes, reactively to stop the first ability, or ultimate to affect you in the first place. You can also swap the knockdown for a curse at this point in the game. You'd use it the same way right before Dynamo wants to ult, but it will either stop him from ulting or cancel it right afterwards, so it's a lot more potent for a higher price, assuming your team is there to kill them before it wears off. Moving on, let's talk about Great Talon. The reality with Great Talon is that he really only deals a lot of damage, so other than debuff reducer and debuff remover, which will reduce the duration of or cancel the trap entirely, then compared to other heroes in this video, there aren't really that many intricate or 200 IQ counters that I'd like to bring to attention. Even so, let's go over what we got. In addition to getting debuff reducer and eventually remover in the laning phase, assuming his traps are a problem, then you can also purchase a knockdown in the mid game to stun him and knock him out of the air, which turns Great Talon into a very easy target. Depending on his build, and seeing as most builds focus on spirit damage, it might be a good idea to invest into spirit armor, since it negates the source of his damage. Generally speaking, it's a good idea to invest both into spirit armor and bullet armor in most of your builds, since the resistance makes a huge difference in the dent any enemies can make on you, not just Great Talon. In the very late game, you can also consider getting an Ethereal Shift, which you can use to dodge his owl by using it right before it's about to land. Now let's talk about Haze. In the early game, then you really want to purchase Return Fire as soon as you can, since all of Haze's damage will come from her weapon, both her primary fire and her ultimate once she gets it. If you activate it, then Haze's ultimate will really just kind of kill herself. Now, it's worth noting that Return Fire isn't a catch-all counter. It starts to fall off pretty fast once she gets enough lifesteal to offset the incoming damage. So let's go over what you need to get as the game progresses. So around the mid game, other than Return Fire, your best choice to deal with her ultimate will be Knockdown. If you see her going for the ult, then she gets stunned to become a free kill, as soon as possible, depending on when you react and activate it. You can also get the Warp Stone as a means to get away from her mid-ultimate, but there are much better options. That being said, once we get into the later stages of the game, then odds are that Haze has started building counter CC items like, say, Unstoppable, at which point the Knockdown won't do much. At this point, you can also look into Curse, since it is faster than the Knockdown, and if you use it before Ultimate or Unstoppable has started, then you can cancel her, but she might still just use Unstoppable before you do so. So when it comes to surviving her ultimate yourself, defensively if you may, in the latest part, towards the later part of the game, or whenever she starts getting really fed, the most reliable option will be metal skin. Sure, it doesn't specifically shut her down, but it will stop her from dealing damage to you, which will let you kill her pretty easily. If she pops her ultimate and there's maybe you and another person, she will lifesteal less because she deals less damage overall, which might give you a chance to trade yourself. Your teammate's gonna be dead, but at least you'll get to survive and potentially kill her. Even if she's fully built from lifesteal, since she isn't doing enough damage, there won't be anything to steal from. Also, today's video is a paid cooperation with Logitech G, but hey. I know it's an ad, but before you skip, hold on. Because in this ad, we're also going to tell you how you can win a G515 and a G502X, both top of the line peripherals. So let me tell you all about that. The reason I'm even telling you guys about this in the first place is because me, myself, have been using the Pro Series and have been gaming with it and popping off with it ever since it came out. I remember pre-ordering the G Pro Wireless, the first one, forever ago, just because I knew it was a good mouse. These mice are the most precise mice I've ever used, and they are insanely light. Something that's really cool about Logitech G is that they developed the entire Pro Series in collaboration with esports pros. For example, the G Pro Superlight was heavily involved with Simple. They have the Pro 2 Lightspeed, which only weighs 80 grams, and it has the Hero 2 exclusive sensor that delivers pro level precision. Also, they have the Pro X Superlight 2 Dex that has light force switches offering optical sensing for instant actuation, made for a more satisfying click feel and lower power consumption. And lastly, they even had a Pro 2 headset that's built with a revolutionary new material that provides better audio responses, reduced distortion, and unmatched sound quality. It's even wireless. But what's this about a giveaway? You can now win the G515 and the G502, as well as enjoy the Logitech Playdays from September 18th to September 29th on the Logitech G's website, where you can find discounts to over 40%. To participate in the giveaway, go to Logitech G's website and find whatever mouse, keyboard, or headset that you've been wanting all along. Write it in the comment section below, and of course hit a like on the video and you're gonna be entered. I also left the link in the description to make it easier for you guys. But yeah, huge thank you Logitech for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. But what about Infernus? Infernus is a pretty mid to late game hero, so there aren't that many reasonable things you can buy to counter his abilities in the laning phase to the early game. But once you start getting into the mid game, you can benefit a lot from the debuff reducer, which can then be upgraded to debuff remover later in the game. This helps significantly offset the duration and damage of his passive ability, and maybe even save your life if you're running away with a sliver of health. By the time he's gotten the ball rolling, it's going to be worth investing into any healing reduction items such as Healbane, DK, or Toxic Bullets, as this turns him from unkillable to quite killable. In the late game, a worthwhile mention if he uses his ultimate to initiate fights can be an item like Curse. If you activate it at the right time once he gets close enough, then he loses his Flame Dash and he becomes a free kill. Next up though, we have Ivy. In a sense, she's a little bit like Great Talon. There's not that much that you can buy to counter her specifically, but there are a few things that you can look into buying. In the laning phase and early game, you can invest into extra stamina or even Warp Stone if you really need help dodging her abilities. You could also look into anti-heal items in the early phases of the game to deny just how much self-healing she gets during a fight, since most Ivies rely on the statue into a punch combo to heal themselves up tremendously. Moving into the mid or the late game, you could also consider buying a knockdown or a silencing glyph to stop her from using her statue or ultimate to get away from a bad position if you catch her off guard. The glyph stops her both from ulting and using her stone form, and the knockdown knocks her out of the air if she's trying to escape you. So other than the respective stats, it's really just personal preference, and it depends a bit on your hero as well as the other heroes that the team is running, what you really need to get. My point is, don't specifically build to counter Ivy. You're gonna regret it. There's probably someone else that needs it a lot more. You probably skipped ahead to this part and you might want to know, hey, what can we do about Kelvin? Early on in the game, it makes a lot of sense to invest into any movement items, especially anything that gives you extra stamina. This lets you get out of the way if he tries trapping you with the ice beam, because the beam does not affect any dashes. You can also purchase any type of anti-healing items, which will help you countering the heal from Kelvin's grenade, as well as his ultimate if you're trapped in there with him. You can also invest into some type of silencing items, like silencing glyph, which you can use preemptively if you know that Kelvin is about to use his ultimate to survive or get out. As you progress towards the mid to late game, another solid choice for if Kelvin tends to trap you in his ultimate might be going for the Ethereal Shift, since it lets you wait the ultimate out in safety. Moving on, let's talk about Lady Geist. Overall, she's just gonna deal solid damage, so depending on her build, for most of her kit you will find the most value by getting bullet or spirit armors respectively, since that negates her damage. Any type of anti-heal will offset the value from her second ability, as well as the lifesteal items that she is prone to buying. But most importantly, Lady Geist will always rely on her ultimate to turn the tides of the fight, or even bait enemies to get close enough so she can use it, swap health, and, get a free kill. So if you purchase any silencing items, such as a silencing glyph in the mid game or curse later on, and then use it right before you or she closes the gap, then she cannot use that ultimate, and her low health trap turns into a completely free kill. After that, we have Lash. In the laning phase, just try to keep some distance and poke him out, but once you start getting a little bit of money, you can start purchasing items such as the silence glyph or the slowing hex. Both of these items, but especially the slowing hex, practically shuts down his entire kit and stops him from engaging or even escaping. As you get more money, you can also invest into something like a knockdown and use it on Lash if you know he is about to use his ultimate, because if your timing is early enough, then the stun will hit mid-ultimate and save everyone. Another solid choice to survive his ultimate in the mid-game can be the Warp Stone, which you quickly use to get behind cover and break the line of sight of his ultimate. As you get into the late game, you could also get an Ethereal Shift to dodge his ult or ground pound, and you can consider upgrading the knockdown to a curse to get a faster effect and have it be a lot more reliable than the knockdown. Next up, let's talk McGinnis. In the laning phase and early game, there's a few solid choices you can buy to shut her down. First, we have monster rounds. These don't just apply to the jungle or the troopers, but her turrets as well. So it lowers the damage you take from her turrets, and it lets you deal more damage against them. The monster rounds can also be useful as the game progresses, especially if she goes for a turret build. Also, if you purchase any movement items, especially the ones that gives you extra stamina, then you will be able to escape her or close the gap more easily, because McGinnis only has 2 stamina bars by default. If she uses her wall to stun you and trap you a lot, you can also consider getting the reactive barrier, because the wall procs the barrier and gives you a fighting chance despite you being trapped. As the game progresses, you can also benefit from anti-heal to offset her tankiness, and potentially even attack speed slowing items such as Withering Whip or Suppressor to significantly lower her damage output. But anyways, moving on, what about mowing Krill? In the laning phase to early game, you will see a pretty huge value from investing into the reactive barrier, as this procs both from the knockup as well as their ultimate. Depending on how the lane goes, it might be worth considering anti-heal just to stop them from gaining value and healing up with the first ability as well. Some items like Silence Glyph or Slowing Hex stops them from burrowing and escaping you, and many don't notice, but if you activate the Silence Glyph or Curse on a burrowed mowing Krill, then it will kind of hang over their head until they eventually unburrow. This means you can use this ability as they approach you, which will have the silence effect apply the second they come out of the burrow, which will stop them from using the first ability or even their ultimate. Next up, we have Paradox. In the early game, you'll get some solid value from the reactive barrier to stop her from getting value out of the entire swap combo. You should also consider buying mobility items like movement items or extra stamina to allow you to get out of a bad spot that Paradox might put you in. And in the early to mid game, you might want to purchase an Ethereal Shift, which lets you stay alive without getting jumped for a few seconds after her ultimate. If you are the support of your team, you can also invest into a rescue beam to yoink your teammates back, in which case you will get a free kill on Paradox and keep your teammates safe at the same time. So what about Pocket? Other than the obvious, that being Spirit Armor, a good purchase in the early to the mid game can be the Silence Glyph, as it instantly lets you silence Pocket and stop them from being able to use any of their abilities, most importantly, escaping or going into their satchel. You should also consider purchasing a debuff remover or debuff reducer if you want to be cheap in the mid to late game to get rid of Affliction if he manages to hit you with it. There's usually no need to buy it in the laning phase until they start getting fed and the ultimate actually has some kick. In the late game, you can also consider purchasing Curse to fill the shoes of the Silence Glyph as well. But what about 7? Once 7 unlocks his ultimate, there's a window where Knockdown is the perfect counter, since it will stun 7 and cut the ultimate short. That being said, after being knocked down a few times, it is likely that 7 is going to rush to get unstoppable as soon as possible, after which knockdown won't really have an effect. You can also purchase a curse, as this applies way faster than a knockdown, but I would not rely on it. Once instead the window where you can knock down 7 has closed and he has his unstoppable, then you should look into alternative items instead, such as Spirit Armor that lets you stay alive against his ultimate, movement items such as extra stamina to escape it, or anti-heal to offset the lifesteal and survivability and just shoot him back. Let's talk about Shiv. Shiv is going to be weak for the first few minutes of the game and then become an absolute beast once you gets his ultimate and his rage. So how do you deal with him? While not perfect, there are a few items you can purchase to stop him from all-inning, or at the very least, lower his impact in a fight. In the early game, you could purchase debuff remover to lower the impact of his bleed. As you go into the mid or early game, you can get anti-heal items to shut down enemies healing and knockdown to punish him if it dives in. If it goes to a very late game, you can also get a curse and use it as soon as he jumps in or he's about to use his ultimate on you, which just shuts him down. What about Vindicta? Vindicta is bound to be annoying in lane, but consider movement or mobility items such as extra stamina to get out of her line of sight if she's trying to snipe you with her ultimate. These mobility items are also useful later on as they let you clear the gap or escape her since she only has 2 stamina bars by default. Speaking of the ultimate, if the ultimate and the crow are a problem, especially the ultimate, you can also invest into additional spirit armor early on. You could also purchase a divine barrier to use on yourself if she's trying to snipe you once you have very little health left. A great counter for her in the mid to late game will be knockdown or maybe even curse if you have enough money, as these will send her down from her flight, which depending on the build can be infinite and make her a much more killable target. Next up is Viscous. In the laning phase to early game, you will very much benefit from movement items such as extra stamina to dodge both his first ability as well as Puddle Punch. Since Viscous generally relies a lot on his spells to do damage, you can also invest into items such as Silence Glyph to deny him from using them. I would recommend using Knockdown and Curse as well, but they don't really cancel his ultimate, not to mention that a stunned Viscous will keep rolling in the direction that they were going, so you're better off silencing him before he actually pops it. That being said, if you want to have a shot at dealing with the ultimate once it's active, just by attacking the ball, look into items that lower the enemy's resistance, such as Bullet Resist Shatter, Mystic Vulnerability, or even Escalating Exposure. Moving on, what about Warden? In the laning phase in the early game, just getting extra stamina will make a massive difference, since his first ability reduces your stamina and his third banks on you staying in place. Once you get more money and head into the early to mid game, you can look into the debuff Reducer and then Remover to get out of his binding word and clear all of the slows he might be getting from his items. If you want to catch him, look into slowing Hex, as this will stop him from running away from you. If you are a support, you could get the Rescue Beam to pull any enemies that are caught by Warden into safety, and if it goes into late game, sometimes a debuff Remover won't be enough, in which case you could get Unstoppable and pop it once he starts to all in on you to counter his entire loadout. And then what should you get against Wraith? In the laning phase to early game, once it's time for ultimates, you'll get the most value by purchasing Reactive Barrier early on, since you get a ton of defense against Wraith if she pops her ultimate on you. Later on in the mid game, you can also purchase Ethereal Shift and pop it right when the ultimate is about to hit to stop it from affecting you. Then you can just cancel it and keep shooting. If you're dealing with a Spirit Wraith or just want to shut her down even more, consider getting a silence like Silence Glyph to stop her from using her abilities, both her cards for damage as well as her faster fire rate buff and her second ability that will let her close the gap or even escape. And finally, what should you buy against Yamato? Overall, you just want a lot of health to survive against her in general. You can also consider getting yourself something like a Slowing Hex, which will slow down her flying strike, which lets you kill her on the way. Another underrated counter for Yamato is the knockdown, especially if using her ultimate is the first thing that she does. If you wait a few seconds after she pops her ultimate and then hit her with the knockdown, then it will land on her head more or less right when it runs out, which lets you kill her off instantly. Just take a look at her stats to see how much you need to wait beforehand if you want to make sure that you get the timing perfectly. But ideally, the one item that you want is Silence Glyph, which you then try to time right before Yamato pops her ultimate. And usually Yamatos will either use her ultimate right before they're about to die or right after they dash in, as they will immediately ult to refresh their abilities and get all the benefits that comes with the ultimate. But if everything else fails and you're getting focused hard when enemies are fully stacked, then Soul Rebirth will bring you back to life even if the enemies kill you. But these should give you a good grasp of items that you should buy to win your lanes even harder and deal with these heroes later in the game. And obviously I know that I listed a ton of items, so really think about whether you actually need to counter the hero you're up against. And as you head into mid game or the late game, focus on the carry of the enemy team, and then generally you just kind of want to focus on building your own loadouts so you actually can do something yourself. By you knowing all of these different counters, that lets you stay informed and might help you understand which items will give you the most bang for your buck, which one can let you counter as many heroes as possible on the enemy team just with you buying one item. So again, hope this video helps. If this helped, hit the like and subscribe. I'm also going to make a video covering mechanical counters instead of item counters against these heroes. So again, make sure you subscribe for that. If you guys want to get even better at Deadlock, check out the video on the screen. Thanks for watching and peace out.